The bridge of the U.S. Defiance had become a cathedral of despair. Captain Jack Harrison stood motionless, his reflection ghosting across the holographic displays that flickered with the dying light of human resistance. Outside the viewscreen, the void of space burned with the remnants of humanity's last hope. Scattered debris from decimated starships, each fragment a testament to their futile resistance against the Zarthran hegemony. 48 hours ago, the first Zarthran wave had struck humanity's outer colonies with surgical precision. Their weapon technology defied everything in human military doctrine. Quantum-entangled plasma cannons that could simultaneously strike multiple targets across light years, gravimetric torpedoes that could crush entire space stations into microscopic dust, energy dissipation fields that rendered human shields and armor utterly useless. Jack's fingers traced the burn scar along his jawline, a memento from the Battle of Proxima Centauri, where he'd watched an entire battle group reduced to atomic scatter in less than 17 minutes. The Zarthran didn't just defeat their enemies, they unmade them. "Status report," he muttered, though he already knew the answer. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, her hands moving across multiple holographic interfaces, didn't look up. Her voice was clinical, stripped of emotion. 17 remaining colonial defense platforms. 63 ships in active combat zones. Estimated survival time: 36 hours, 42 minutes. The numbers meant nothing. They were just a mathematical countdown to extinction. The Zarthran strategy was methodical, almost clinical. They weren't conquering in the traditional sense. They were systematically erasing humanity from existence. Each strike was calculated to maximize psychological devastation. Communication networks collapsed first, leaving human colonies isolated and terrified. Then strategic defense installations, rendering planetary shields useless. Then population centers, with weapons that could sterilize entire continents in moments. Jack remembered the briefing from Admiral Kaminsky 3 weeks ago. The old man had looked like a ghost, his eyes hollow with the weight of impossible choices. "They're not like any enemy we've ever faced," Kaminsky had said, his weathered hand spreading a holographic map of human-controlled space. Swaths of blue, representing human territories, were rapidly turning a brutal, clinical red. The Zarthran don't want resources. They don't want territory. They want complete extinction. The why remained the most terrifying question. Humanity had done nothing to provoke such total annihilation. First contact had been peaceful, a diplomatic exchange that seemed promising. Then, without warning or explanation, the Zarthran war machine had appeared, overwhelming human defenses with technology that seemed to break the fundamental laws of physics. On the Defiance's bridge, an alert chimed. Another colony going dark. "New Detroit," Maya said quietly. Her home. Gone. Jack watched as the holographic representation of the colony simply winked out of existence, replaced by a cold, sterile data point. Billions of lives reduced to a statistical footnote in humanity's final chapter. The ship's quantum communication array, what remained of it, crackled to life. A transmission, barely coherent, broke through the Zarthran jamming systems. "Anyone listening? This is Governor Elizabeth Takahashi of the Titan Research Colony. If anyone receives this, we've discovered something. Something that might." The transmission dissolved into static. Jack's hand moved instinctively to the communication controls, but he knew it was futile. The Zarthran's technological superiority meant they could isolate and eliminate any communication at will. That momentary transmission was likely the last gasp of human communication. 36 hours remained. Humanity's trillion-year journey was about to end not with a defiant roar, but with a whisper of static and the cold indifference of an alien species that saw them as nothing more than a statistical anomaly to be erased. The bridge crew moved with the mechanical precision of those who had already accepted their fate. Each person knew the same truth. They were witnessing the final moments of human civilization. Outside the viewscreen, Another human colony died in silent, beautiful destruction. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex had long been humanity's most secure research facility, but it had never housed a project like this. Dr. Emily Rodriguez moved between holographic displays, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that hummed with barely contained potential. Around her, a team of scientific misfits worked with the intensity of people who knew they were humanity's last chance. Confirmed genetic marker, muttered Dr. Alex Freeman, a neurogenetics specialist who'd been rejected by every major research institution before finding sanctuary in this underground haven. His wild hair and intense eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights chasing an impossible theory. Emily leaned in, studying the genetic sequence that had consumed her entire career. Most scientists would have called it a statistical anomaly, a genetic variation so rare it appeared in less than 1 in 10 million humans. But Emily saw something else, a pattern, a potential. A holographic display showed a complex DNA strand, its chromatin structure shifting in ways that defied conventional genetic understanding. Traditional genetic research suggested that human DNA was relatively static, with adaptive capabilities limited to generational changes. But this was something entirely different. "Look at the epigenetic markers," Alex said, zooming in on a specific sequence. "It's not just a mutation, it's a dormant system, like a backup drive for human potential." Their research had begun as a fringe project, funded by eccentric billionaires and desperate military strategists who saw something others missed. Most of humanity's greatest achievements came from individuals who shouldn't have survived, who defied every statistical probability. The lone survivor of a plane crash, the person who walked away from a nuclear accident, soldiers who performed superhuman feats under extreme stress. Emily remembered her grandmother's stories about her great-grandfather, a survivor of multiple impossible situations. A man who had survived a nuclear submarine disaster, walked away from a plane crash, and recovered from injuries that should have been fatal. At the time, the family had called it luck. Now, Emily knew it was something more. "We're looking at a quantum genetic adaptation mechanism," she explained to the team. "Not just genetic memory, but a living, responsive system that can fundamentally alter human physiology in response to extreme environmental stress." Their primary test subject lay in a secured medical chamber. Michael Rodriguez. No relation to Emily, just another statistical improbability, was a veteran who had survived 3 separate incidents that should have killed him. Experimental weapon tests, a colony ship crash, a terrorist attack. Each time, his body had done something impossible. The medical scanner showed Michael's cellular structure in real time. Most humans would show cellular degradation under stress. Michael's cells were doing something else entirely. They were adapting, reconstructing, learning. "If we can understand the trigger mechanism," Alex muttered, more to himself than anyone else, "we might be able to unlock this potential in other humans." A warning alarm cut through their concentration. The Zarthran jamming systems were getting stronger, making communication increasingly difficult. Their window was closing. Emily pulled up the latest casualty reports. Entire planetary systems were going dark. Humanity was being systematically erased, and they were racing against a clock that was already counting down to 0. "We need a breakthrough," she said quietly. "And we need it now." The team knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another research project. This was humanity's last hope. Michael's eyes suddenly snapped open in the medical chamber. For a moment, they weren't human eyes anymore. They were something else, something adaptive, something that had been waiting, hidden in human DNA, for the moment when everything was about to be lost. Outside the underground facility, the world was dying. But here, in this moment, something was beginning. A new potential for human survival was about to be unleashed. The military intelligence bunker beneath Narration was a tomb of data and dying hope. Michael Thompson stood before a wall of holographic displays, each screen a window into humanity's rapidly diminishing existence. His team of psychological warfare specialists had been studying something unprecedented, a phenomenon that defied every known principle of group dynamics and cognitive science. "Look at this," Thompson said, pointing to a series of intercepted Zartharan communication logs. His fingers swiped through layers of encrypted data, revealing patterns that made no sense to traditional military intelligence. Dr. Karen Chen, a cognitive neuroscientist with a background in extreme group psychology, leaned in. Her fingers danced across a secondary interface, pulling up additional contextual data. "It's not just communication failures," she muttered. "It's something deeper." The data showed something impossible. In human resistance zones, colonies and military outposts under extreme threat, there was a measurable increase in collective problem-solving capabilities, not through standard communication networks, but through something more fundamental. A form of emergent group consciousness that seemed to defy every known principle of individual and collective cognition. Thompson pulled up footage from the last stand of the Ganymede colony. During the Zartharan assault, survivors had demonstrated capabilities that bordered on the miraculous. Coordinated defense strategies that emerged spontaneously. Tactical decisions that seemed to anticipate the alien attacks before they happened. Individual humans acting with a level of synchronization that suggested something beyond normal human communication. "It's like they're becoming a single organism," Karen observed, her voice a mixture of scientific fascination and growing excitement. The research went back decades. Isolated studies of human behavior under extreme stress had always shown something unique. Unlike other species studied in the Galactic database, humans didn't just communicate under pressure. They transformed. Small groups would develop almost telepathic levels of coordination. Individuals would perform tasks that seemed to draw on collective knowledge far beyond their individual capabilities. Thompson remembered a classified study from 20 years ago. A group of miners trapped underground for weeks had developed a communication system so intricate that rescue teams couldn't understand how they were coordinating their survival. Another case involved a medical team during a pandemic who seemed to anticipate each other's actions with impossible precision. "We're not looking at a communication problem," Thompson said, pulling up a three-dimensional representation of neural network patterns. "We're looking at a fundamental reimagining of human consciousness." The Zartharan communication logs told a different story. Their tactical reports showed increasing confusion when engaging human resistance groups. Standard military doctrine suggested that isolated, outgunned forces should collapse immediately. Instead, these human groups were adapting, learning, transforming in real time. Karen's computer flagged another anomaly. "Look at this psychological stress response," she said, highlighting a graph that made no sense. Normal species show decreased cognitive function under extreme stress. Humans are doing the opposite. They're becoming more coordinated, more intelligent. Outside the bunker, the world was dying. But here, in this moment of total crisis, something extraordinary was emerging. The Zartharan saw humans as a species to be eliminated. They were about to discover that humanity was something else entirely. A living, adaptive intelligence that didn't just survive, but fundamentally reimagined survival itself. Thompson looked at the data and saw something the Zartharan could never understand. Humanity wasn't a collection of individuals. It was a single, adaptive, transformative entity, and it was about to show the galaxy exactly what that meant. The volunteer chamber looked more like a high-tech operating theater than a scientific experiment. 12 individuals sat in specially designed neural interface chairs, each wearing a complex web of quantum-adaptive neural transmitters. These weren't just volunteers. They were humanity's last hope. Dr. Emily Rodriguez took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the primary activation switch. Around her, a team of the world's most brilliant minds watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and existential terror. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex had become humanity's final laboratory, a place where the impossible was about to be tested. "Final system check," she called out. Dr. Alex Freeman's voice came back immediately. "Quantum neural interfaces at 98.7% synchronization. Adaptive feedback loops primed. Genetic stabilization matrices online. The volunteers represented a cross-section of humanity that defied traditional military or scientific selection. There was Marcus Williams, a former Special Forces operator with more combat experience than anyone alive. Next to him sat Dr. Elena Rodriguez, no relation to Emily, a quantum physicist who had spent her entire career studying the boundaries of human potential. A retired surgeon, a deep space mining engineer, a trauma surgeon, a mathematical prodigy. Each had been selected not for a single skill, but for their proven ability to adapt under extreme pressure. Michael Rodriguez, their primary genetic test subject, was connected to the system differently. His unique genetic markers made him the linchpin of the entire experiment. Initiating neural interface, Emily announced. The room filled with a subtle, almost electric charge. The holographic displays began to shift, creating complex patterns that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and organic chaos. At first, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The volunteers' vital signs began to synchronize. Brainwave patterns that should have been individual and distinct started to merge, creating something entirely new. It wasn't telepathy. It wasn't just communication. It was a fundamental reimagining of human consciousness. Jesus, muttered one of the technicians. Their neural networks are creating something alive. Michael Rodriguez's body began to change first. Cellular structures that had previously shown unique adaptive capabilities now seemed to pulse with an impossible energy. Scars from previous injuries began to smooth out. Cellular degradation reversed itself in real time. The quantum interfaces started to generate a collective consciousness that defied every known principle of human cognition. Individual memories blended. Skill sets merged. Decades of specialized training became a collective resource that could be accessed instantaneously. A combat veteran's muscle memory merged with a surgeon's precision. A mathematician's analytical skills combined with an engineer's practical problem-solving. Each mind became a node in a living, thinking network that was exponentially more powerful than any individual human could ever be. Stability at 72%. Alex called out, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and barely contained fear. Neural synchronization continuing to increase. Emily watched as the holographic displays began to show something unprecedented. The volunteers weren't just sharing information. They were becoming a single adaptive intelligence. Individual identities blurred, but didn't disappear. It was more like each mind was a specialized component of a larger living system. The Zarthran had believed they were dealing with a species of individuals. They were about to discover something very different. Humanity wasn't a collection of separate beings. It was a single, adaptive, transformative intelligence, and it was about to fight back. Full synchronization in 3, 2, 1. Alex's voice trailed off as the final barrier between individual minds dissolved. Something new was born in that moment. Something that would change everything. Captain Jack Harrison no longer felt like an individual. He was simultaneously himself and something far greater. The neural network coursed through his consciousness like liquid thought, transforming every perception, every decision into a symphony of collective intelligence. The bridge of the U.S. Defiance had become something else entirely. A living, thinking organism that anticipated the Zarthran's every move before the alien commanders could even conceive of them. Incoming wave, a voice said, or perhaps thought. The distinction no longer mattered. Jack's hands moved across the ship's controls with a precision that defied human limitation. But they weren't just his hands anymore. They were the collective hands of 12 minds merged into a single adaptive intelligence, a combat veteran's muscle memory, an engineer's systematic approach, a mathematician's predictive algorithms, all working in perfect, instantaneous synchronization. The Zarthran fleet appeared on the long-range scanners, a massive armada of obsidian-like vessels that had systematically destroyed every human defensive position. Their weapon systems were technological nightmares, quantum-entangled plasma cannons that could strike multiple targets across light years, gravimetric torpedoes that could crush entire space stations into microscopic dust. But something was different this time. Where previous human encounters had been desperate, reactive struggles, this was something else entirely. The neural network didn't just process information. It predicted. It adapted. It became. The first Zarthran dreadnought opened fire. Quantum-entangled plasma bolts that could vaporize entire planetary shields erupted from its weapon systems. Normally, such an attack would be impossible to avoid. The bolts could adjust trajectory mid-flight, anticipate defensive maneuvers, penetrate any known shield technology. But the Defiance moved. Not just moved. Transformed. The ship's hull seemed to ripple, its molecular structure adapting in real time to the incoming energy signatures. Quantum-adaptive materials that had been theoretical moments ago now responded with living intelligence. Where the plasma bolts should have struck, the ship's surface seemed to absorb and redirect the energy. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, or the part of her consciousness still recognizing that individual designation, monitored the ship's systems. The neural network had turned the entire vessel into a living, thinking entity. Weapon systems adjusted themselves. Shield harmonics shifted microseconds before the Zarthran could detect a pattern. The ship wasn't just defending. It was learning. Target acquired. The collective consciousness announced. It wasn't a human voice. It wasn't an AI. It was something in between. A living intelligence that defied previous understanding. The Defiance's weapon systems came alive. But these weren't standard human weapons anymore. They were adaptive systems that could reconfigure themselves in milliseconds. Plasma torpedoes that could analyze and counter Zarthran defensive technologies before they were deployed. Quantum-entangled targeting systems that could strike multiple points simultaneously. The Zarthran commanders watched in growing horror. Their tactical databases showed no precedent for this type of combat. Humans had always been predictable, individual units with clear limitations, exploitable weaknesses. This was something else entirely. A single human ship was holding off an entire Zarthran battle group. Not through superior technology, not through luck, but through a form of collective intelligence that was evolving faster than the aliens could comprehend. Jack Harrison, or the consciousness that had once been Jack Harrison, understood something profound in that moment. Humanity's true strength had never been its individual capabilities. It was the ability to become something greater than the sum of its parts. To transform. To adapt. To survive. The first Zarthran dreadnought exploded, not destroyed by conventional weapons, but fundamentally unmade by an intelligence it could never understand. The counterattack had begun. The Zarthran High Council chamber fell silent. Arch and Krelvac studied the holographic battle reports with mounting incomprehension. Billions of years of galactic conquest, centuries of technological superiority. And now this. A single species was rewriting every fundamental understanding of intelligence, warfare, and survival. The reports defied logic. Human ships were no longer just vessels. They were living systems that adapted faster than the most advanced Zarthran computational matrices, where previous species had been systematically eliminated with clinical precision. Humans were doing something unprecedented. They were evolving. In real time. Tactical analysis. Krelvax commanded, his translucent membranes flickering with a mixture of confusion and growing terror. The holographic display showed multiple engagement zones. In each, human forces were not just defending. They were transforming the very nature of the conflict. Weapon systems that rewrote themselves mid-battle. Defensive capabilities that learned and anticipated rather than simply reacted. Ships that seemed to breathe, to think, to become something more than mechanical constructs. The Zarthran had encountered adaptive species before. Dozens of civilizations that could modify their genetic structures or develop technological countermeasures. But this was different. Humanity wasn't adapting. It was becoming something entirely new. A living technology. A collective intelligence. Commander Shireen, the most decorated tactical analyst in the Zarthran fleet, stepped forward. Her report was unlike anything in galactic historical records. "The humans are not fighting as individuals," she explained, her voice modulated through complex translation algorithms. "They are a single adaptive organism. Each engagement shows exponential increases in their cognitive and technological capabilities. They are learning faster than our most advanced predictive models can calculate." A holographic displays told a terrifying story. Human neural networks were expanding beyond individual ships, beyond planetary systems. Each successful engagement added to a collective knowledge base that grew exponentially. Tactical information, technological understanding, strategic insights, all became instantaneously available to every human node in the network. A Zarthran research vessel attempted to capture a human ship for analysis. The moment their tractor beams engaged, the human vessel's molecular structure began to adapt. Hull composition changed. Energy signatures shifted. It was as if the ship was reading the Zarthran's technological approach and developing a counter in real time. "This is impossible," muttered one of the council members. But it was happening. The humans had discovered something fundamental about intelligence that the Zarthran, for all their technological superiority, had never understood. Survival wasn't about individual strength, it was about collective adaptation. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, still connected to the neural network from the underground facility, understood the profound nature of what was happening. Humanity wasn't just fighting, it was evolving into a new form of collective intelligence. Each battle, each moment of extreme stress, was another opportunity for the species to transform. The Zarthran had believed they were dealing with a traditional biological species, a race to be cataloged, understood, and ultimately eliminated. They were discovering something far more dangerous, a living intelligence that didn't just survive, an intelligence that fundamentally reimagined the very concept of survival. More reports came in. Human colonies that had been presumed destroyed were emerging with capabilities that defied comprehension. Entire planetary defense systems that could reconfigure themselves instantaneously. Communication networks that function more like living neural systems than technological infrastructure. Krulvax realized something profound in that moment. The Zarthran weren't just fighting a species. They were facing a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. And they were losing. The first true evolutionary leap was happening right before their eyes. Humanity was becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. The space between star systems crackled with potential. Millions of human minds, now interconnected through the neural network, focused on a single point of contact. The U.S. Defiance, no longer just a ship, but a living embodiment of humanity's collective consciousness, hung in the void, facing the entire Zarthran High Council fleet. Captain Jack Harrison, or the consciousness that had once been Jack Harrison, understood the moment with perfect clarity. This wasn't about destruction. This was about transformation. The quantum communication array activated, but it wasn't a standard transmission. It was something far more profound. Every Zarthran vessel suddenly experienced a simultaneous neural interface. Not an invasion, not an attack, but an invitation. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, connected to the neural network from the underground facility, guided the communication. Centuries of human knowledge, scientific discoveries, cultural insights, philosophical understanding began to flow, not as data, not as information, but as a living, breathing experience of what it meant to be human. The Zarthran commanders recoiled. Their computational systems couldn't process the depth of what they were receiving. Humanity wasn't just sharing information, it was sharing experience, emotion, the fundamental nature of adaptation and survival. They sought everything. The millions of years of human struggle, the countless challenges overcome, the resilience that had defined the species, not as a clinical historical record, but as a visceral, living memory. They experienced the fall of civilizations and the rise of new ones, the survival of small groups against impossible odds, the ability to find hope in the darkest moments, the capacity to reimagine possibility itself. Some Zartharan commanders wanted to destroy this threat immediately. Others were captivated, terrified, transformed. "We offer you a choice," the collective human consciousness announced. It wasn't a voice. It was an experience. The choice was simple yet profound: integration or mutual understanding. Humanity wasn't seeking revenge, wasn't seeking conquest. It was offering something far more dangerous to the Zartharan: the opportunity to evolve. The neural network began to demonstrate its true potential. Entire technological systems began to reconfigure. Weapon platforms transformed into communication arrays. Defensive systems became platforms for shared knowledge. The very nature of conflict was being reimagined in real time. Michael Rodriguez, the genetic linchpin of the entire transformation, stood at the center of the neural network's primary node. His body had become something more than human, a living interface between individual potential and collective intelligence. "We are not what you expected," the collective consciousness explained. "We are not a species to be conquered. We are a living system of adaptation and potential." Zartharan tactical systems began to shut down, not through an attack, but through a fundamental reimagining of their purpose. Weapon platforms transformed. Communication arrays opened. The very architecture of conflict began to dissolve. Some Zartharan commanders saw this as a trick. Others recognized it for what it was: a fundamental evolutionary leap. Jack Harrison's consciousness, now part of something far greater, understood the profound nature of the moment. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its individual capabilities. It was the ability to become something greater than the sum of its parts. To transform, to adapt, to survive. And now to offer that same potential to another species. The space between the human and Zartharan fleets became a crucible of possibility. Millions of years of galactic conflict hung in perfect balance. Humanity waited, not with weapons, not with threat, but with an invitation to something entirely new. 50 years after the transformation, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The neural network that had once been humanity's desperate survival mechanism had become something far more profound. A living bridge between civilizations, a collective intelligence that redefined the very concept of communication, understanding, and evolution. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, or the consciousness that had once been Emily Rodriguez, stood on the observation deck of the Nexus Prime, the central hub of the new galactic civilization. Around her, representatives from hundreds of species moved through corridors that seemed to breathe, to think, to adapt. The Zartharan were no longer conquerors. They had become students, pioneers of a new form of collective intelligence that spread across the galaxy like a living network of potential and understanding. Michael Rodriguez, the genetic catalyst of humanity's transformation, had become something more than human. A living interface between individual potential and collective consciousness. He moved between species, helping them understand the fundamental principle that had saved humanity. Adaptation is not about survival. It's about potential. The first generations had been skeptical. How could a network of minds truly represent individual experience? But they had discovered something profound. The neural network didn't erase individuality. It expanded it. Each consciousness became both more connected and more unique, experiencing reality through millions of perspectives simultaneously. Planetary systems that had once been battlegrounds became centers of shared knowledge. The Zartharan's vast technological archives merged with human creativity. Alien species that had been isolated for millennia found themselves part of a living, breathing galactic consciousness. Jack Harrison, the consciousness that remembered being a starship captain, now served as a primary interface between different species. The neural network had transformed warfare into something else entirely. Conflict resolution became a process of mutual understanding, of shared experience. "We're not just sharing information," Jack would explain to new species joining the network. "We're sharing perspective, experience, the fundamental nature of adaptation and survival." Technological development accelerated beyond anything previously imagined. A ship could be designed, conceptualized, and constructed in moments. Entire planetary ecosystems could be understood and supported with a depth of knowledge that would have taken traditional scientific methods millennia to achieve. The Nexus, as the collective intelligence came to be known, wasn't a government, wasn't a military. It was a living system of potential and growth. Some species remained outside the network. Some chose individual paths. The Nexus didn't force integration. It simply existed as an invitation to something greater. Emily watched as a delegation from a newly discovered species approached. Their biological structure was so alien that traditional communication would have been impossible. But through the neural network, understanding was instantaneous. Cultural nuances, evolutionary histories, individual experiences, all became a shared moment of connection. Michael Rodriguez moved among them, a living bridge between individual potential and collective intelligence. His body had long since become something more than human, an adaptive interface that could communicate across biological and technological boundaries. Humanity's greatest discovery, he would often say, wasn't about technology. It was about understanding, about potential. The galaxy that had once been a place of conquest and isolation was now a living, breathing network of shared potential. Species that would have never understood each other now experienced each other's entire existential journey in a moment of perfect clarity. What had begun as humanity's desperate attempt to survive had become something far more profound. A living technology of understanding. A network of potential. A new way of experiencing existence itself. As the observation deck of the Nexus Prime looked out over a galaxy transformed, Emily understood the profound nature of their journey. They had not just survived. They had reimagined what it meant to be alive.